Thanks, everyone. As I mentioned before, it is my distinct pleasure to be able to introduce Congressman Kevin Brady to you today. Congressman Brady is only the third Texan in 226 years to lead the powerful House Ways and Means Committee. It's the first and oldest committee in Congress. It shapes the future of our nation through its power over taxes, trade, health care, welfare, Social Security, and Medicare. And just last month, he unveiled the House Republican tax reform blueprint that Stephen Moore of the Heritage Foundation described as a thing of economic beauty, and Forbes magazine predicts will vault America back into the lead of world economic competitiveness. He's here today to tell us more about his revolutionary plan to bust up the IRS and to make the tax code so simple and fair it can fit on a postcard, examples of which I think a number of you have on your tables. So please help me welcome Congressman Brady.
Steve, first, thank you very much for the introduction, to Morgan and others for the invitation to be here for AGC. I jumped at the opportunity to come here today, not just to tell you sort of where we're going and why on our tax reform blueprint, but to invite you to help shape that blueprint going forward. As Steve said, I really have the best job in Washington. My main job in succeeding Paul Ryan is to stop smiling when I'm around Paul Ryan, because he's got the toughest job maybe in Washington these days. And for me, the chance to be the third Texan, to have a chance to actually shape the way Americans are taxed, shape our trade policy so we can compete around the world, take the first real steps to save Social Security and Medicare, our major entitlements that have to be addressed, a chance to shape health care and welfare reform are really sort of the reasons you go to Congress. I live in the Woodlands, just north of here. I've commuted to work now for 10 terms, so I have 2 million miles flying back and forth. We figured out for local Boy Scout troop, I'm on my 5th round trip to the moon, commuting back and forth. And I do that to stay close to the communities and the families and the businesses that I work for and represent. And so the chance to be here today to talk to you about tax reform and to start the discussion with how we make this tax code fair and simpler and more pro-growth. Again, Steve, thank you very much for having me here. So let me sort of tell you how this all came together. At the beginning of the year, not knowing exactly how the presidential race would pan out, but believing that elections aren't just a contest of personalities, they're a contest of ideas, House Republicans decided to pick 6 of the biggest vexing challenges facing America, develop detailed, credible solutions for those problems, run for office on those solutions, and if we are returned to the House majority in November to enact these solutions. We chose 6 major issues. One of them, regulatory reform, which we think is key to economic growth. Another, welfare reform, moving people, giving them an opportunity to move out of these sort of government poverty traps and into real lives of substance and dignity. 3 of these areas I either led or helped lead. One, welfare reform. Second is, how would you really deliver 21st century health care, both in replacing the ACA, how do you save Medicare for the long term, but sort of the crown jewel of what we called the Better Way agenda is tax reform. We laid this out, identified our solution late in June. In a perfect bit of public relations timing, we held the announcement the morning after Britain voted to leave the European Union. So even my family didn't see that press conference. It's been a bit of a soft opening, but actually worked to our advantage because we have been aggressively reaching out, House Republicans, especially the Ways and Means Committee, throughout the country over August and September, holding hundreds of town hall meetings, roundtable forums like this, to be able to lay out our proposal and to begin getting the feedback to it. I identified two major goals for us in this endeavor. One, rather than have a tax code designed merely to wring money from you, we need a tax code built for growth, built for the growth of wages, built for the growth of businesses and jobs, built for the growth of America's economy. And the second goal was to leapfrog America from dead last among our global competitors back into that lead pack and keep us there for decades going forward. So growth and leapfrogging us back into that pack globally drove our decision making on this blueprint. And if you hear me say over and over that we're proposing this to you, it's because that's exactly what we're doing. We're not imposing this blueprint, we're proposing it to you. This is not our tax code. This is yours. And for the first time, maybe that you recall, you ought to have a real say in how you're taxed, both as a family and as a business. And so the timetable we're taking is that we're going to continue outreach and listening and getting feedback through the end of this year, looking to make this blueprint better at every step. At the beginning of the year, we are writing some of the tax blueprint right now in the tax reform bill itself. We'll make some of those final decisions, determine how to transition from the old tax code to the new one, and bring it to the House floor for vote by mid-2017. So this is, for the first time in 30 years, the opportunity we have to actually fix this broken tax code. We've focused on three major reforms. The first, we went all in for growth on jobs and wages with the lowest tax rates on job creators in modern history, in a redesign of how we tax businesses. Our second reform, we go all in for fairness and simplicity for families and individuals, so much so that it's estimated 95% or more of Americans will be able to file using a postcard type system. Then finally, we propose to bust up the IRS, and I'll tell you what we're doing and why we're proposing it. So on the first, all in for growth, we propose lowering the rate on job creators to the lowest in modern history, 20% for corporations, which is the lowest in U.S. history, 25% for pass-throughs, partnerships, all the other structures. Again, the lowest since the Great Depression. And it turns out an equal tax cut of 43%. Our principle there is that we think capital for growth, capital is best deployed at home to help businesses survive tough times, grow in good economic times, and we'd rather have you, frankly, growing the local economy than sending the money to us and growing Washington's economy, which happens all too often. We're going all in for Main Street job creation, so not so much government-sponsored jobs, but private sector jobs. And we know from experience of the last half century what drives job creation. We looked at in fact, if you look at every indicator there is, from consumer spending to government spending, on and on and on, there is one factor that is married to Main Street job creation, like to the nth. When it goes up, jobs go up. When it goes down, jobs go down. It is a perfect alignment. And you already know it. It's business investment. When businesses invest in new buildings, equipment, new software, new technology, Main Street jobs grow. And so we're proposing to you, for the first time in history, immediate, unlimited expensing of all business investment. So new buildings, new equipment, new software, new technology will be written off the year that it's purchased and carried forward in future years as well. This may be one of the most pro-growth provisions in this blueprint. We don't stop there. We know our businesses don't compete just on Main Street, they compete around the world. And today, we're an outlier. We have one of the worst tax codes on the planet because we tax you here, we tax you abroad. In effect, when you compete and win around the world and have earnings, we punish you to bring those earnings back to be reinvested in the United States in research, manufacturing, growth of any kind. And so we propose to stop doing that. We tax here in the United States. We won't tax abroad. We propose that the business rate for bringing your earnings back to invest in America be 0%. We don't stop there either. We know today, because of the way China, Europe, our major competitors tax, They take their taxes off their exports, headed our direction. They put it on imports headed into their markets. We don't. So as a result, a product or a technology or a service made in America today, made in Houston today, is at a price disadvantage here in Houston and a price disadvantage abroad. So we propose to stop doing that. We propose to have take all taxes or key taxes off exports from products and technology made in America and put it on imports coming in. It's called border adjustability. And it's a big change from what we do today, but it has big impacts. First, it will make sure that going forward, competition will occur based on price and quality and service, not on the tax code. It allows us to dramatically simplify our international tax code. For those of you dealing with transfer pricing, check the box, all that goes with international taxation and its complexity, we dramatically lessen that complexity. And then perhaps maybe most importantly, coupled with the lower rates, coupled with no longer taxing businesses around the world, this provision virtually eliminates any tax incentive to move research, manufacturing, or headquarters jobs overseas. Because our goal is not to simply stem the tide of businesses making that decision, and while we pay attention to the publicly held companies making those decisions to invert or move offshore, we don't so much on private companies, which we know is occurring. So our goal is not simply stem the tide of those decisions. Our goal is to bring that investment back to the United States. And when that new investment project or opportunity comes forward, to be among the 1, 2, 3 best places on the planet to make those investments. We also eliminate the alternative minimum tax, and then for me, one of my favorite parts of the blueprint, because I've worked on it for so long, is that we propose, for the first time since it was created in 1916, to permanently end the estate tax. It is still the number one reason family-owned businesses and farms aren't passed down to the generation. It is, most economists believe we generate more revenue and more economic opportunity without it than we have with it in place. And so the result of all those provisions on the growth side, Tax Foundation estimates that the blueprint will grow the economy 9.1%. As importantly, it will grow wages on average about 8%, create a little under 2 million new jobs, but it will vault us into that leadership role with Ireland and the UK in those global tax structures, which is where we want to be. So that's where we go all in for growth on jobs and wages. So for the family, individual side, as you know, the code also is incredibly complex. Since President Reagan and Houston's own Secretary of the Treasury, James Baker, successfully reformed the code in the 1980s, it has tripled in size, 70,000 pages, 4,000 changes in tax law just over the last decade. That's one new tax law every day. I don't know anyone in this room who could name those changes, including me. As we like to say in our town hall meetings, the tax code is now 10 times the size of the Bible with none of the good news. That's sort of how we describe it. And so for years, Americans looking at this complexity have asked, why can't we have a tax code so fair and so simple it could fit on a postcard? And for years in Washington, everyone just sort of dismissed that, poo-pooed that idea. Well, we put our tax team to work, and it turns out that's exactly what we're proposing to you. A tax code that fair, that simple, that understandable. And it's a big change from what we have today. And here's how we proposed you to do it. First, we flatten out the brackets. As you may remember, President Reagan, when he began his reform, there were 15 different tax brackets. He lowered it dramatically. Today, now there are 7. So we proposed to flatten it out even more to 3 tax brackets. We propose to lower those rates at each of those brackets. So the top rate won't be, effectively, as it is today, over 44%. We're proposing a top tax rate of no more than 1/3, and then 25% and 12%. We expand to take care of those of modest incomes and those just sort of working their way up the economic ladder. We propose to increase the standard deduction, simplify it, so we protect more of the first dollars that families earn and effectively do away with the 10% tax bracket. It's not needed going forward. And then we know, about a third of Americans itemize. And we thought about the postcard. We thought about what do families count on when they are itemizing. And so what we're proposing to you in this filing system is to retain and make even smarter some of the key provisions that families count on. So we propose to keep the mortgage interest deduction because for most families, the biggest investment they make in their lifetime is their home. We love charitable giving, so we propose to keep the charitable tax deduction. In fact, we're looking at ways to unlock it a little more because we think it's important for you to give to the church, to the community, to your college, to your medical center. We think those charitable giving dollars are used wisely, and you hold people accountable when you give them your dollars, and so we retain that as well. We know it's expensive to raise kids, and so we propose to keep and increase a bit the child tax credit. And then, because college is just so expensive, we propose on the postcard to keep help with those college costs as well. In fact, we'd like to redesign it a bit to make sure that it also opens the door for technical skills as well, which are in great demand in this country and will going forward. We have two boys. Kathy and I have two boys, live in the Woodlands. So I have an 8th grader and a senior in high school. Senior high school loves to fish. He's president of FFA, Future Farmers of America. Now, I don't know if any of you have teenage boys. Mine are incredibly unfocused and disorganized. So when I heard that he was named president of FFA, I turned to my wife and said, "Hey, congratulations, you're the president of FFA." You got to keep him lined out for a year. But, I think he's going into welding. He wants to own a custom fabrication shop someday. Even technical schools are expensive. If you really want to dig deep into getting those types of skills, we know that's important for the workforce. So we propose to keep that type of help on the postcard. And then other than one other provision, redesigned to help people move from welfare to work, sort of grab that first rung on the economic ladder, that's it. I mean, that's what we're proposing for the postcard. Now, maybe not everyone in this room, yeah, thank you. Maybe not everyone in this room would be able to use this system, but we think as high as 98% of Americans will be able to do that. Now, here's the point. This is your postcard. It's not ours. It's certainly not mine. We can put anything back on this postcard you want. We can put any provision you want. We can put dozens of provisions back. We can turn this postcard back into a telephone book if that's what you want. As long as we know to do that, you and I are going to have to send more money to Washington and hope we can kind of beg some of it back. So we can put on the postcard the credit you get for putting energy efficient windows in your home. We can put back the $7,500 credit you get for buying a Tesla. We can put back your credit for your gambling debts. Not that that would affect anyone in this room. The point being, we can put anything back. If you choose, as long as we know we have to raise the rates, send it to D.C. and hope again that it will work out for us. And so that's what we're proposing, all in for fairness and simplicity for families. The final reform is based on this. If you have a fair and simpler tax code, it really demands a fair and simpler tax collector. The IRS today is a huge agency with the power to destroy lives in businesses. And rather than being focused on customer service, it is in some cases targeting Americans based on their political belief. And so we propose to bust them up, to break them into 3 smaller, more focused units. One focused on business, staffed with business tax experts who can accurately and timely answer your questions on business taxes. Another unit doing the same for families, focused on customer service. I don't know how many of you have tried to call the IRS lately, but you didn't get through. And if you did get through, if you talked to 3 different people, you got 3 different answers to your tax questions. That level, they're the only agency, well, there's 3. only major agency that doesn't even have a customer service plan to hold staff accountable for. So that level of lack of customer service, I guarantee you that's not acceptable in your organization. Certainly isn't acceptable in the IRS. So the second unit's focused on state-of-the-art customer service, timely, accurate answers to tax questions. Then the other unit is smaller. We propose it be independent of the Treasury. It's based on this. I'm so tired of talking to small businesses and families who get in a dispute with the IRS, sometimes not even a major one. They spend years and years and thousands of dollars, and even when they win, they've lost. So we're proposing, in effect, a small claims court for tax disputes, independent, objective, where you can get your disputes handled quickly and accurately without having to hire legions of accountants, attorneys to do that. So we believe in the 21st century, for an agency that hasn't been redesigned in more than 3 decades, just as your organization, I'm almost certain, does not operate as it did 3 decades ago. We think the IRS needs a new function, a new role, a new design. So that's our third and major reform. So 2 points before I finish, and we can have this discussion as well. If this all sounds too good to be true, it's not. We've designed this to break even within the budget, factoring there'll be economic growth from these reforms, but it will break even within the budget. The only way to do that is to take many of those special provisions for certain industries and people and trade it off for lower rates and simplicity for everyone else. So, for example, on the business side, one of the major trade-offs we're proposing is to not be able to deduct interest, net interest expenses going forward. That's a big change from how we do business today. There's smart policy reasons for it. For example, if you're going to do unlimited expensing, and companies borrow for that and write off their interest expense, at that point, that's a negative interest rate. Effectively, we're paying you to buy something. We're not going to do that. There are dozens of ways businesses finance their operations, their expansions, their mergers and acquisitions. Only one is tax preferred. Our proposal to you is that how you finance your businesses and models as your business, not the Treasury Department's business, and eliminating that net interest deduction allows us, again, to lower the rates and become dramatically more competitive. But that's a big impact, and may be a big impact on you in this room today. On the family side, I talked about some of those provisions that we're proposing not be there. Here's two that maybe hit more close to home. We adopted our 2 boys. We had no luck getting pregnant. We adopted our boys, best blessing we've ever had. We weren't able to take the charitable or the adoption tax credit, but for a lot of families, really important. We're proposing that rather than having provisions like that are available to some occasionally, that rather than that, we lower the rates, allow people to keep more of their money and use it for what are priorities in their life. We also propose not deducting state and local income and property taxes, which is a big change from what we do today for those who itemize. But here's why. Under the current law, yes, you are able, if you itemize, to deduct some of that. But the way we do it is we just raise your federal taxes. You send it to Washington, you hope you can claw some of it back. But the way that works, because taxing jurisdictions are so different, we effectively all just subsidize each other one way or the other. And so low and modest income tend to subsidize higher income. Rural, urban areas, low tax states like Texas, subsidize high tax states like California and New York and Connecticut and others. And so our proposal to you is, rather than do that, why don't we just lower tax rates for everybody and you just pay your own taxes at the state and local level. These are big changes from what we do today. And that's why we need your input, because we're going pretty bold and pretty fair and pretty simple. We need your input to determine how we do this in the most pro-growth way. And I'll finish with this. So one of my requests, my major request to you today, is to test drive this blueprint. to model it, to take a look at it, not just for your business, but for your clients, and where it affects you both as an individual and as a company. And my request is, don't take just one provision out of the blueprint, like interest deductibility, and test drive it like it's that old clunker of a tax code that we have today, because we're proposing a new car. It has different features. It drives differently. Most economists believe it drives much faster than the tax code we have today. So test drive it overall, all those provisions in there. Bring us back that feedback, because we're listening. In my tax team in Washington, led by our Chief Tax Counsel, Barbara Angus, we want to have this conversation with you, not just one time, but continually going forward, because, as I said, we're going to be listening, looking for ways to improve it through the end of the year. And then we'll write the transition rules from that old clunker to the new car to make sure we're smoothing that out, those changes, and doing it in a way that grows the economy the best we can. And so that's our tax blueprint. I invite you to test drive it. And with that, JB, if we can, I understand we're going to sit down and take some easy questions. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Great, thanks. So
Absolutely.
let's do that.
My first question to you, Congressman, is one of the biggest issues that we've had as an ecosystem is the regulatory environment that Dodd-Frank created for the capital providers that are actually in this room. A lot of our folks here are private equity groups, and now they are required to register with the SEC as investment advisors. Doesn't really apply. Can you tell us what the general philosophy is around Dodd-Frank, and do we really even have a shot at getting relief from Dodd-Frank?
I hope we do. It's been a tough battle with pretty modest results, to be honest. And in this area, I see the administration continuing to add regulatory costs and compliance costs to the investment area. They really, as you know, don't trust that type of investment advice. I think they see themselves as better stewards, of retirement. That's hard to believe, but better stewards of investments by individuals. And you're seeing this in different state-designed savings vehicles going forward as well. This is starting to take off. And so we've tried through both legislation and through our appropriations, the power of our purse, to try to delay, stop, amend, in some way just sort of restore some common sense on the Dodd-Frank side, but we've had pretty limited success to date. And we're seeing this, too, not just in the EPA on the energy side, water, OSHA, labor. On the tax side, we're facing some major regulations, especially these dealing with earnings strippings that have major impact. They're not tax abusive problems that are being addressed at all, but the compliance costs we fear are just going to be dramatic. And so here's the challenge. Once that regulatory rule is out of the barn, we chase it forever. The chances of getting it back in are really slim. So there ought to be real thoughtful reforms on making sure that initial rule and final rule are either approved by Congress, goes through some type of approval process where we're not always chasing it, which is what we do today.
We were told, it was very interesting, that when we looked at Dodd-Frank, the venture capital arena was exempted from registering under Dodd-Frank, and we asked several congressmen, not the current congressman here, why was it that middle market private equity was not excluded? And the answer was, you just weren't here. You weren't here to articulate your position.
That Ways and Means didn't have a whole lot of jurisdiction, none, on Dodd-Frank. Obviously, I oppose it. There's a better way on all of this, but it's going to be a challenge.
One of the things that we'd mention is that it's interesting in here in the room with the capital providers that we had, and we had a good chat with Tom Coughlin with Cap Street just before we entered into the room. private equity-backed businesses in Texas since 1998 have grown jobs by 442%. Non-backed private capital companies,
Maybe by how much?
440%. Non-backed private equity companies have grown jobs at 83%. So it's a massive difference between companies that secure private capital to grow versus those that don't. And maybe you could tell us what our challenge is to educate both sides of the aisle on what private capital does for this country, particularly in the middle market where most of the jobs are created.
Yeah, well, first, being involved legislatively isn't a matter of choice, it's a matter of survival. Because one change in the tax law, regulatory approach can wipe out years of decision-making and risk and hard work. So you've got to be at the table. So you're right to be engaged in a major way, especially right now. Look, most members of Congress don't come to Congress with a private equity background. I was a Chamber of Commerce executive in the Midwest where I grew up, Beaumont, and then the Woodlands area. So my job was to help start small businesses, build a good business climate, recruit new industry. That's where I have the most knowledge. So your model isn't necessarily, I've learned a lot about it, but even I continue to look to you for the education, on that model, what the challenges are. We were talking to some of your folks before we walked in here, sort of the look and how long you're investing and the timetables and those issues. You've gotta be not just there to be against something. You need to have a long-term relationship. You need to offer to be that resource for your member of Congress back home here on these issues. You know what I mean? Someone who will take at least once a year, twice if you can, but at least once a year to be able to come to their office or invite them to yours, to be able to sit down, work through some of these issues, because I think it's critical, because it's complicated and a lot of members don't have this background. Really critical, both they and their staff know how this model works. So
Sure. One last question, a little bit about the tax policy, and then I'd like to open it up to the folks in the audience that I'm sure have even better questions than I do. Both candidates, both major political party candidates have come out against the concept or come out for taxing carried interest and private equity. We noted with interest that your tax plan is basically silent on carried interest. Can you tell us a little bit about why and what your thought process was behind that?
yeah, so we've worked on this blueprint over time for about 5 years. My predecessor, Paul Ryan, Dave Kemp before him. As we were working through the blueprint, we recognized there are certain industries who have enough different tax provisions, they interact a great deal, and so we set them aside. So financial services, insurance, to some degree energy and real estate, but we set those aside because they need more thought and consideration. Carried interest is one of those. Look, we want to reward risk and capital investment. We want more of that. And so the short answer is we haven't made a decision on carried interest. We are, as you know, trying to put a premium on capital formation. And one of the parts of the blueprint that I just moved past that may be the second most pro-growth of this, for families in business, we're proposing that after we flatten the rates and we've lowered them, that we cut the taxes again by half for earnings from savings investment. So, if you take that dollar, there's only three things you can do with it. You can spend it, you can save it, and you invest it. So you can spend it, fine. If you save it, the earnings from that will be taxed half of your normal rate. So if you're 33%, half of that, 25, half, 6 or 12, half of that, investment as well. So capital gains, dividends, interest will be taxed at some of the lowest rates we've seen, because it turns out it's not only good for us to be saving as families and business, it's really good for the economy when we do it. So we're looking at carried interest in the same vein of increasing capital, rewarding risk. We want to make sure look, if something is normal income, just designed to look like something else, it's going to be taxed as normal income. If it's real capital at real risk over long term, it ought to be taxed at the savings and investment level. So we're looking at how best to do that. We'd love to have your thoughts on how to approach that, because I know for the last 5 years, 6 years maybe, in the Ways and Means Committee, I've had to fight the fight against taxing carried interest, and with members who don't know the difference between, traditional real estate partnerships, venture capital partnerships, the one word, giant hedge funds. That's one word apparently up in Washington that's used politically that way. We're just trying to slow everything down and take a look at it in the pro-growth area. So we're still considering it.
Well, that sounds like an invitation for us, so we'll be visiting. I'd like to open it up to our membership. Carrie.
Yeah, corporate to go to 20%. So from 35% today. So it's a 43% tax cut. In what way? Yeah. So we're looking at simplifying, obviously, on the corporate side, on the pass-through side, on the family side as well. So, and one of the changes we've made on the pass-through side was that, as you know, all those are taxed at the individual level, which can be really good. Part of the challenge is that because they are, you can't differentiate between Bill Gates and Bill the local plumber. So Bill the plumber pays higher rates. We're proposing to separate business from wage income on pass-through side, so that, unlike partnership, you'll still be at the individual side. But in other pass-throughs, you can get to that lower rate. We know we're going to have a fight over how high you tax Bill Gates and Donald Trump and Paris Hilton and whatever, but we ought to really be focused, too, on how low we can get on the pass-through side, the job creation side. So.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. So we'll distill this to a different type of description. What happens if what happens to your tax plan if Hillary wins the election?
Okay, so elections matter in a big way. Donald Trump has proposed a tax plan very similar to this blueprint, different in some regards, as you know, and wants to do tax reform within the first 100 days of his presidency. So we're going to be ready for that. Secretary Clinton sees things differently, where we're trying to change the taxes so that there's no incentives left to move overseas unless your economy, your competitiveness dictates it. She wants to add exit taxes, raise cap gains in a major way. She sees it differently than us. Here's my thinking. Looking at the way President Reagan and Secretary Baker did it, tax reform is such a huge issue. At the end of the day, if it's going to become law, it's going to be successful, it's going to have support from both parties. Maybe not in equal amounts, by the way. I'm not predicting Nancy Pelosi will ever vote for a tax reform plan that we're proposing, but it's going to have to include ideas from Democrats in this. It may not at every step of the way. For example, House Republicans, not knowing yet what the Senate's going to look like or the White House, we may opt to move out the most pro-growth, simple, economic driver of the tax code we can, knowing the Senate's going to make some key alterations and discussions with the White House. So what I've told our Democrats in the House is that, look, if you have ideas to grow the economy, simplify this tax code, make the IRS more accountable, bring it to us, because we're really interested in this. And I'm convinced there are individual Democrats who know we can't stick with the current code. The rates are too high. We've designed it so we can't compete internationally. They know there have to be changes. I'm looking forward to working with them.
Great.
That was a long answer to a short question. My guess is with Trump, if he were to win, we're going to huddle early and come up with a package focused on the economy, regulatory relief, tax reform, and trade. With Secretary Clinton, we don't know yet what her priorities will be in those early months, so that'll be a different direction.
Steve, you had a question?
The state tax. Has there been some discussion about your blueprint that you do the step up in basis of that?
Yeah, we've continued the step up in basis in our blueprint for a number of reasons. We think it's the right thing to do, frankly. We ought not be taxing inflation and growth. And so, yeah, that's where we're going. We actually, and I'll tell you too, on the Joint Economic Committee, you know, I had our economic team update the impact of the estate tax. You know, it generates only a day and a half of spending. But the damage it does in the economy, in my view, far greater than that. There is a smarter way to tackle these issues. So what do you think?
Look, I think that the issue you run into is that you've got businesses and individuals in land where you're looking at and you're saying that they're not able to make good decisions for the end of their life because they're too concerned about whether this will be a tax impact or positive or negative, and they're not being able to make that decision for them. So we've heard Senator Clinton's proposal that we adjust the state tax and we put back step up the base or we get rid of it. You know, going back 3 generations trying to figure out what grandpa paid for something.
Yeah, it is. And actually, we're running into this now in new Treasury regulations dealing with valuations. You know, in the state tax, creates serious complexity problems, and sort of they're trying a backdoor approach. So we're in discussions with them on that rule as well as the 385 rule. So.
Next question. Yes, sir. In the back.
You had commented that this was, I guess I would say, revenue neutral. Has that kind of been reviewed by the Congressional Budget Office? Or?
No, they don't do that. It's Joint Committee on Taxation will do the estimates. They haven't, because we haven't finalized it, but those big elements we just went through, yes. And because they're the score, the budget keeping, depends on how all these interact with each other. They've given us their scores. We're right in the neighborhood right now that we want to be in for being revenue neutral. Now, my point is, I'm not going to leave growth on the table, economic growth, because we're off a dime or two, but we're going to stay within that budget break even for the most part. I just think, look, we're going to lose some revenues in the early years, but there'll be more economic growth in the early years. We'll catch up in the end of the first 10 years, and then we do really well after that. We just need to recognize what these sort of dynamics are as we do it. So before we go, after we take this question, can I ask a question of these?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Colt?
sir.
Can you comment on, you mentioned changes to Social Security, Medicare. Can you comment on those programs?
Yeah.
What they might look like under the Better Way?
Yeah, changes in Social Security, Medicare. Well, first, both of those, especially Social Security, is dependent upon more people going to work and their salaries increasing. So one of the best things I think we can do to help Social Security is to increase wages and job creation. So it really ties into it. So 2 thoughts. On Medicare, there's 3 major changes that need to be made. We actually made the first. Redesigning the way we pay our local doctors to reward quality, you know, and in value, not volume of procedures. Very big change. We're now doing the same thing within the rest of healthcare providers, from those leading up to the hospital care, the care you get in that hospital, the post-acute care you get as well leading out of the hospital. We're redesigning that as well, sort of moving from the old model that we have today, cost controls from Washington, mandates out of Medicare, and micromanaging every second of your healthcare life. The model we're moving them to is focused on innovation, competition, quality, in us, the government, stepping back, allowing providers to take more risk and reward, which we know in our region, because we have some of the cutting edge providers, works. So you won't save Medicare, whose main hospital fund is bankrupt in a decade. You won't save it through just cutting benefits. You're going to save it by getting a better bang for your healthcare buck. On Social Security, we're going to roll out from one of our key members, the chairman of Social Security, his solution on how you save it for the long term. It will focus on gradually increasing the age of full retirement. You'll keep the early retirement 62. a true cost of living increase going forward, and slowing the growth of benefits for higher earning individuals. It does it without raising taxes. It's a good start for the discussion on Social Security.
Congressman Brady, we'll let you answer your question.
Thank you. This one is not a scientific survey, but I just want to get your thoughts. So on that first reform, reducing taxes, redesigning, how we're able to compete globally, are we generally headed the right direction?
Show of hands, yes.
Generally headed the right direction? Okay, thanks. On the second part, look, we're proposing a much simpler tax code on the family side. Has a lot of impacts. Going to something very fair, very simple, understandable, is that direction you want us to head?
Show of hands, yes.
Okay, thank you. Everyone okay with busting up the IRS? Okay, good. Yeah, they throw napkins out when we do that. Look, we have a lot of work to do here. This is not the end of the discussion. It's the beginning of the discussion on tax reform. But it's interesting. Reporters up there and back here, all they ask for is, so how does this game going to end? How does it end up? What does it look at the end of the day? We don't know. The news is that for the first time in 30 years, to use a football analogy, because it's football season, for the first time in 3 decades, we're going to put the ball in the field, and we're going to move it toward the goal line. We don't know yet how it will turn out, but we know this, the current code we have isn't working for anybody. And so we just think, going forward, we can have a stronger economy, simpler tax code, we can make improvements, and we'd love to have your input and help as we do that. So thank you
Congressman,
very much.
thank you so
JB,
much.
thank you.
That was terrific. Please.